business as it is presented on the agenda. The first item we're going to get into is a new business, which is a consolidation discussion with the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen. I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to apologize at first. I'm getting sick and I'm congested and I have a hard time hearing a little bit, so just giving that fair warning right now. My ears are still clogged, so if I say something I can't really hear, just let you know that might be the case. We're here tonight because we want to have a discussion, and I do stress the word discussion, with the members of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen regarding the issue of consolidation of schools. It's been a topic that's been talked about in numerous locations. I'm sure we've all had a discussion somewhere, some shape, some form about it. I do want to stress that we are here for discussion purposes only tonight. There is no formal plan that's been recommended by the Board of Education. The only thing the Board of Education has voted on is basically to have this discussion. We have done some research into some of the issues surrounding it, and as with a lot of decisions, most decisions involving town government, there's trade-offs. There's pros and cons to everything. So once again, for stressing the discussion, we have prepared a brief little presentation, and honestly, I'm not that savvy with it, so you're going to have to bear with that too. But on top of it, there's also some documents that are being passed around, which are preliminary documents, just to kind of show some of the documentation and some of the issues that are here. I'd like to ask if we could, is just to, for the record, for everyone who is from the Board of Finance or Selectmen to identify themselves, just so we all have a sense and everyone knows who everyone is as we're having some of these discussions. So, Ben, do you mind introducing some of the Board of Finance members?
Ben Whitty, Board of Finance.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Richard Smith.
Kate Rieger.
Maria Moore.
And I record.
Penny Miller, Recording Secretary.
Great. Board of Selectmen?
Dan Jarrett, First Selectman, and we have a whole complement with Alicia Henderson and Jack Pease.
Great. Once again, thanks for everyone for being in attendance. So just a little background. Most people do know the current configuration of our schools. We have, the town of New Hartford is approximately 38 square miles. We have 3 grammar schools. We have Bakerville Consolidated and New Hartford Elementary, which are both K-2 schools. And we currently have Ann Anthony School, which is a 3-6 school. As we started to look at this process is actually, there is a little bit of history behind it. A couple of years ago, the this New Hartford Board of Education actually asked the regional board to look at consolidation and further regionalization. As many of you know, that there was a study done and it didn't really go anywhere. There have been many attempts in the past, back in the 70s and 80s, to regionalize as well as consolidate. There was a plan at one point, and approximately 20 years ago, to consolidate the schools and actually move everyone up to here and build an addition. And that was before my time of living here, but once again, that did not reach fruition. So we are looking at the issue again. It's not a straightforward issue. I think there's, as I said, there's many pros and cons that go along with it. And once again, we're just having a discussion to get people's feedback and kind of get a sense of where people want to go with all this. So starting off with that, Philip has prepared this slides for us. So we're going to, with any decision, you got to look at the pros and cons. The first set of pros are obviously the economic benefits. There is a potential, obviously, to save money. We'll go through that a little bit later with some of the documents go there. So for most people here, that's probably going to be the first thing that piques your interest. There's money to potentially be saved in all this. So it makes sense to look at. The next of the things is kind of deal with more of a utility argument, economic utility that use things to their maximum capacity. You can have low efficiencies in operation and staffing. Instead of people traveling between multiple schools, they can stay in their current location and focus on what their jobs are and enhancing education in our town, and not spending time driving and doing other things that is not focused on education. Huge redundancies, those are all the same lines. We could get rid of or consolidate some positions as well as cut back on things that we purchase, such as computers and other things like that, because we only have to buy those things for 2 schools instead of 3. The next is other options have been exhausted in prior budget cycles. Part of this is obviously we've all been through the difficulty is presented for all of us. And we've had to make some really tough choices. We've already cut back on staffing, we've cut back on teachers, we've cut back pretty much all levels of our budget. The most recent budget cycle saw a reduction in transportation, which I'll get into a little further, which is the second bus we've cut. Basically, we're kind of running out of options to cut. So this is kind of basically, one of the few things that's left that can be looked at to try to find additional savings. And then the last thing is what I already talked about, is less travel and shared staff. We can try to focus people where they're supposed to be doing and what their jobs are.
Just give an example of that last piece of the shared staff would be your art teacher, your music teacher, physical education teacher. All three of those travel between the two primary schools. And then there are other specialists who would also travel. There are some special education teachers or teachers who we hire, a school psychologist, or teachers who we hire, or people who deliver specific services for children with special needs, your occupational therapists, your physical therapists, and maybe even speech and language therapists as well.
Do you have anything else to add? That's fine.
No.
And the other thing from the bonus of this whole consolidation discussion is the educational benefits. We feel as a board that there would be better educational benefits with the primary grades consolidated in one building. Phil, you can go into that a little more detail. What else is we have here?
Sure.
Go ahead. Why don't you pick
Sure.
up?
Not at all. I hear quite often from the primary staff how much they would like to be together. Right now, they sometimes when they meet via Skype, or if they don't do it electronically, they'll rotate buildings, so they'll have to build in some travel time, obviously, to get to a certain building. Up in Antolini, we have the privilege, when we have our professional learning community meetings, our team meetings, the meetings are able to happen with all participants there because they all are there. So many of the primary teacher staff feel like their programs, their efforts to collaborate could be a lot smoother. That would indirectly and directly affect a lot of those pieces that are there, the instructional piece, their professional development as a team. So those would be improving instruction, improving professional development along those lines.
And a note there further, in the latest teacher's contract, there is a provision where the teachers are required to meet after school for a period of time. And, in order to avoid, once again, the travel getting from one place to the other, everyone will be in the same building at the same time. If there's downtime during the day where someone has an issue, they can easily just go to their colleague and talk it over instead of trying to come up with meetings or Skyping or things like that. It's just obviously a lot easier for people in the same building to effectuate all that. So that goes into improving instruction as well as professional development. Has the ability to allocate the resources equitably. We hear sometimes people say, well, one school's got this, the other school has that. They're getting something better than the other ones. This will just level the playing field that everyone's got access to the same amount of things, all the resources that are available. The other thing, the big problem we have lately is balancing of class sizes. It's always a common problem, and it leads to the next one too, which is there's a dividing line in town. Every year it switches. It's never the same. It's basically trying to keep the class size in the Bakerville equal with the class size in New Hartford. And as kids move in and out, you can see definitely a big discrepancy there. One year's class of kindergartners may have 21 or 22, and the other class over New Hartford Elementary might have 17. And then if someone moves in or out, you got to stick them where they live instead of where they would best be a fit for leveling with the classes. So it's been a constant problem, which is also the problem with transportation. We're always getting a situation where it's using the Westville area, where the kids go. We've had situations where you have kids in the primary schools where a first grader might be at Bakerville and their older sister is at New Hartford Elementary. And of course that makes somewhat happy parents when you have that. But in trying to balance all that with the class sizes, you end up with some funky transportation routes also along with it. So overall, we think that educational benefits support closing the school. Well, the pros, why Bakerville versus New Hartford Elementary? New Hartford Elementary is a newer, better facility. We feel it's a better, as a school itself, the gym is better, it's in better shape. However, Bakerville is a larger facility that could accommodate future growth. So, weighing those two things, there's trade-offs there when we look at that. But the focus so far has been mostly on Bakerville. But once again, we haven't solidified any plans, so, anything's open to discussion. Obviously, after you get to the pros, you get some cons. There's a state statute, and it's part of your packet. Connecticut General Statutes 10-283, there's an amendment to it that didn't have much of an impact to the meat of the statute, which basically says that you will be required to pay back the state a certain sum if the building is not redirected for public use. Now, there's quite a bit of uncertainty as we sit here right now to know exactly how it's going to play out. When we originally contacted the state to get their opinion on it, all they did was send us a statute. But basically my reading of it is a 10-year period that's potential for a payback starting from when the school board accepted the project as being completed, which was, I believe, February of 2006. That's in some of the materials there, but it's really kind of hard to read. And then the question is so that 10-year payback period would get you to either February 2016 or the fiscal year 2016. We've tried to go back to the state to try to get some further opinions on how that all works. To date, Phil has not been successful in getting any affirmative response, i.e. no one's returned his calls. And we can keep looking further at that, but it is kind of to say exactly what that liability would be, we don't know where it is right now. But there are a couple numbers that when I get to the statute, I'll go through those with you and we'll talk about what that would be.
And just clarify, Brian, for the audience, that when you're talking about money, it has to do with the money that the state reimbursed for the renovation project.
Correct. Even though the renovation project is being paid for this year, my understanding, in September, it's going to be complete for the town obligation, that doesn't take care of what the state's reimbursement potential is for their contribution towards it, which, as I said, it looks like we could be on the hook potentially up until 2016 for that. And they amortize it over 10 years, so we can do a simple math. If the school is closed as a fiscal year July 1st of next year, you're approximately 2.5 years, although I don't know if the state goes from the date it was accepted or the whole calendar year, fiscal year. I don't know how they work that. So these are some of the questions we need to get answered. But anyway you cut it, it looks like there is some sort of liability, potential liability that would impact all this. That covers all that. For other cons is future use of the building. What is it used for? Whose budget is it under? Who decides, who controls of it? Who controls the responsibility to maintain? And will planning pros be successful while plan for the building? While it wasn't our focus to focus on what the next use of the building would be, I do have a question myself, is that if any plan gets brought forth to the taxpayers and the voters of this town, will it be successful without a future plan for the building? I don't know the answer to that question. I do know, having spoken to other people about the last time one of these things, the last time in early 1990s or late 80s, Reggie, I know, was first selectman at the time. Some of the concerns that were brought to me is that there really wasn't a plan for the building. So that's why maybe some people didn't vote for it at the time. So the question comes, what happens to the building? Whose controls after it? That's another question that needs to be figured out. Other kinds of future school growth and needs. What's the future going to bring? What's the population going to bring? We have some documents that talk about what's been done in the past, covering the past 10 years. We have not done any scientific study or hired any expert to do a demographic study to say, in 5 years, New Hartford's going to have X amount of school children as of yet. That may be another direction we want to go with all this, is try to get a professional involved. But to date, all we're relying on is past statistics, such as what the school populations have been, as well as Phil recently got some statistics as what the birth rates have been in New Hartford. And what you'll see is that while they've kind of started here, kind of went down, maybe level out a little bit, and then the past 2 or 3 years they've gone down drastically. Is that trend going to continue? As of right now, I don't know, but it certainly does appear that that's where the trend is going.
I want to add that while Brian states that we haven't invested any money into a formal study, the last time we did invest as a board was probably my first or second year, so 2005 or 6. And the projections that individual did, and this happens to be an individual that works with lots of the school districts, but his projections are off from the reality. He had projected us to be around 625 to 30 at this moment. And what are we, 5 69. So even when we get those scientific projections, so to speak, they're not always accurate.
Right. I mean, so we, even if you can hire an expert to come up with the data that you think is going to be reliable, but again, it just may not be. So, and obviously, if you look at consolidating a school, where are you going to go if the population increases? What are you going to do if you have to increase classes? 3 years ago, I believe, we dropped those sections from 5 to 4. And that seems to be holding out, and we're okay with that. But if we have to go back to 5, then there's obviously going to be a space consideration. So that's another one on the list of comments. The other thing, Phil, I'll let you talk a little bit more about this, but this is something that actually the board, we haven't even digested yet. In response to Connecticut's inability to meet the No Child Left Behind federal standards, Connecticut sought a waiver from those requirements, and the waiver was granted in the form of this new law. This is Public Act 12-116. One of the goals of our Board of Education this year is going to be to fully grasp and understand and implement that. We've already begun that process even before this was enacted because it's part of the Common Core standards, but there's a lot of different stuff that's going to impact, that potentially could impact us. And one thing that may come up when we look at this is there's going to be a overhaul in the testing, this new thing called Smarter Balance Assessments. Kids are no longer going to be taking CMTs where they just fill in a bubble and everyone gets the same test. The new tests are going to be that if a child answers a question instead of taking 6th grade math, depending on their answer, they're going to get a different question to answer for their next question, depending on how successful they were in the last one. So it's really designed to try to target everyone's individual abilities. What does that really mean in terms of the school population? Not necessarily all that much, but I will say enacting all this stuff and getting off the ground is time as well as cost intensive.
It will have an impact on the instructional program, and that's really the focus. That while we have done a fabulous job at identifying those standards and isolating those standards, and that's why our kids do so well on our CMTs, the difference now in the instructional paradigm is such that in order for us to allow that child to go to that next step based on his or her performance on that assessment, we have to have the resources available, and the teaching paradigm that will change, that will allow that. It isn't going to be as whole class as it is currently, or in smaller groups as it is currently. It will be more individual. So the curriculum changes that are changing from the Common Core are one thing. The instructional changes, we are being told from all different angles. Our presentation last week, if we focus on the curriculum, our kids aren't going to be performing at the levels that they are now. If we focus on the instructional piece, that's where we'll see the bang for our buck in this new Smarter Balance assessment.
And one thing that's as a result of all this is that there are new standards that are going to impact every grade, including your kindergartners, your first and your second graders. And we as a board have not digested this, we haven't even discussed this, but what appears to be somewhat of a movement, and there was a presentation 2 weeks ago at the regional from an individual, Jonathan Costa from Education Connections. It was a joint board meeting with regional and all the surrounding boards to try to get an overview of what this is really going to be about. And according to him, there's going to be a big push for all-day kindergarten. Right now, Connecticut does not require all-day kindergarten. And when we first started looking at this particular study, that was one of the first questions that came up. What are we going to do about that? And we decided as a board, we're not pursuing all-day kindergarten. We're not doing it. But right now, there's a change afoot that may mean that although the state may not require all-day kindergarten, they may make it that the assessments and the expectations are that you're kind of forced to do all-day kindergarten. It's kind of a backward way of doing it. They're not going to require it, but they just increase the standards so that you're kind of forced to do so. So obviously, if that was the case, there's money involved with that, as well as further space issues is where we're going to house an all-day kindergarten program with 2 schools. And then obviously maybe the preschool, everyone talks about that, is going to be possibly something in the future. We don't know that. But it is something at least to throw up there and say, is that going to be required sometime? We don't know, but it is something at least to consider as we're looking at these.
Clearly, there appears to be more of a focus at the governmental level on early childhood education. So that's just up there to say, you know what, we may have some changes that we have to make.
So, another comment is the transportation we talked about. Per our policy, kids cannot spend more than 1 hour on a bus. I think all of us on the board also kind of feel that that's stretching it anyway for kids our age. A sixth grader spending a 6-year-old spending an hour on the bus is too long. But we've already consolidated 2 buses, and I will say the first week after the last consolidation of a bus, last week wasn't that smooth, to say the least. Although we kind of expected it was coming anyway. We knew that was going to happen as a result of it, but going that further and trying to see where the transportation is going to lie between 2 schools instead of 3, it's a little hard to predict exactly what we're going to need for transportation. The studies, we did get some information from DACO at the initial point, and at that point they represented to us that there wouldn't be any need for change in transportation if we went to 2 schools, but I take that with a grain of salt, honestly, and I'm not sure I fully believe it. And since then, we've already cut a bus, so, whatever decision has to be made with transportation is going to have to be at the time when we know where our kids are. Every year, kids obviously are at different locations, and we're going to have to follow our policy and try to get them, keep the buses as short, concise as possible. So, but the unknown is what exactly the bus route's going to be. It's hard to predict at this point. And then get on to other considerations. Where do we go from here? What's some of the further steps we can do? One option, and when you look at some of the newspaper articles that have been distributed, is perhaps to seek some sort of third-party consultation. We are not the only district wrestling with this problem. There was an article yesterday in the Register Citizen about it. It's been passed around. We've included also one from Region 12. The article yesterday talked about issues in Stratford, Waterbury. Manchester just closed a school. We know that Windsor just consolidated a school. Winston obviously is having a big issue trying to get their school not consolidated, I guess, is where they're going right now. In everything else I've seen, or at least with some of these newspaper articles, is they've gotten someone else involved. Someone with a little more expertise, someone who can kind of facilitate this, who's got no real stake in the game, but to try to help along in that process. So that's something we may want to consider. Along those lines, further collaboration with the DOE, DOS, we haven't had a lot of these sort of meetings together. I think it's an important thing to do. Continue doing, especially with regard to this topic. We have a subcommittee, a long-term planning subcommittee that's in the DOE currently. Maybe perhaps we grab a couple members from the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen to be a part of that, to try to work our way through some of these issues. That's another option to try to get through if we don't want to hire a third party, or even if we do hire a third party. We'll get another subgroup to look at that further. We believe that whatever happens with this, we need to get some kind of public hearing. If we decided to continue going with all this process, we want to have further discussions, not only with the boards who are here, but also with the rest of the public and get people's input. The reason why you're here for is that we're going to be seeking input as to some of the questions and concerns, and then so everyone knows what's going on, feels knowledgeable, feels comfortable with the process. You may not agree with the final result, but at least you know that you were heard in the process and not after the fact that no one had the opportunity to be heard. We put up there the building project. Some people have gotten in. We've talked about that the Board of Education may be seeking a building project to do some renovations at this building, so the roof and the windows and some other things, doors that we've been looking at doing. But the question becomes, well, where does this building project go? Can it go a different direction? Do we want to look to, not saying we do this, but do we want to look to now solve the problem with the 3 schools and perhaps do an addition here now to address that here in Anthony? Maybe not. I'm just throwing it out there. Resolve space concerns perhaps by putting an addition on New Hartford Elementary. These are all just sort of things to consider. We're already going to be searching for a building project, and it's just a question of what's going to be encompassed in that. And then the future of the town should go for the public to decide. Eventually we believe it should go to a referendum. If a decision is made to move forward in this regard. If you look at our assumptions there, we're hoping to maybe have it for November. Obviously, I think we might be a little behind the ball at this point to get that done, but it's still a potential to do so if everyone is so inclined. So that's basically it for the overview on this. But I would like to just run through quickly some of the documents that we handed out, just to show what, they're not on a slideshow, I apologize, but I don't know if everyone's got a copy.
I think everybody has a copy, or there are more.
More copies if anyone needs them up here. The first document you see are the assumptions. As we began the process, we had to get something on paper to try to figure out where we're going to start. And as you can see, we went through that and came up with certain assumptions with regard to that. Once again, I want to point out these are drafts. They're not set in stone, things can change. But we did start out with the idea that the current student population, and this is before we even considered any consideration of all day kindergarten, but current student population pre-K to 6 requires a minimum of 27 classrooms. Additional classrooms are required for art, music, physical education, Spanish, special education, band course, and library media. Future use of the building as a town function has not been addressed in the study. Once again, we're not coming up with a solution to what to do with the building afterwards, but the question, it does beg the question, does the solution need to happen in order for this to actually work? And people may have different opinions on that, but this started early off. Obviously, the consolidation plan will not be implemented in the 2012 budget year. We were looking this last spring, and we said right from the beginning there would be no chance to do it for this past year's the budget we've already started, but there is sufficient time to consider for next year's budget. Any consolidation plans were based on current student needs. The documents you look at are already dated in a sense because they were last year's kids. We're already in a whole new year that hasn't even been addressed. So even then, we're going to be looking at kids in 2013 and 14 if this gets off the ground, and we'll have to address those needs, and not the students who were here last year. All students in one modified school facility maximize learning opportunities and cost efficiency. Obviously, one is better than 2 or 3, and 2 is better than 3. So. All operational costs currently contained in the BOE budget will transfer to the town. That is an assumption we made, but in the end, we as a town have to figure out how this is all going to work out and whose budget's going to be responsible for the future use of the building. Based on current student needs, staff levels will decrease, and as we go through some of the cost cutting, you'll see the cost estimates, you'll see how that happens. Based on recent trends, student population will remain steady or decrease. There's a graph that talks about that as we move further along too. We did come up with a timeline. Obviously, we're behind on that. We tried to get this off the ground last June, and we just couldn't seem to arrange a meeting in time. So here we are in September. So obviously, we're a little behind the time frame that's been laid out here. The next thing I want to point out is a draft of potential costs and savings. This, just to give you what this is, we had asked Dr. Riley to go meet with his administrators and come up with, right from the beginning, come up with a basic outline of where some cost savings could be. And as you can see through here, this is what he came up with. I want to point out a couple things, though, is that at the time, he met with his 3 administrators, and right now 2 of them are no longer here. So the new administrator's input is not reflected in this. Also, this is not something that's actually been approved by the BOE. This is what we would actually do. There's some areas that we specifically do not put any dollar savings in terms of specialist compositions and special education. Because once again, that's going to depend on what the needs of the students are at the time. There could be some further savings along those lines, but it's a little hard to predict last winter what next summer's kids are going to need. So we kind of left that alone. Then further down, you see operational savings. That's something that I think is a little more easier to grasp onto because you can easily calculate what the oil usage is, electricity, and things like that. That essentially, the operation savings there is approximately $82,000, which, the building, if it was maintained in some capacity, some of that would still have to be used in one shape or form. The next page has to do with other things considered. These are costs. We didn't put a lot of time putting dollar figures on that. I've talked about some of the reasons why, but the point is that there are some costs that would have to be calculated into the equation also. The next page is just something that Dr. Rowley got from Donna, right? Your plan, it just talks about the birth certificates for the past 10 years. As you can see, that seems to be a downward trend. Obviously, other people can move in the time frame where they need to be educated, but it does seem that we are having declining births, so that's not really surprising anyone. The next page has to do with enrollments. As you can see, in October 2002, we had 654 students. 10 years later, we're at 569. So that's a pretty significant drop over 10 years. And I will say once again that it always seems in the past 2 to 3 that you've seen a real steep decline. So it's a little hard to say with certainty that that's exactly where we're going, but it certainly appears to be the way.
Brian, excuse me. for one
Sure.
second. Philip, on the birth certificates, a first grader today, or a kindergartner today, was born in 2007?
Well, it would be 6, 7,
Okay.
because of their age and the cutoff. But typically, I mean, you can look at 6 and 7, because some parents hold their kids back another year, some parents don't. So it's primarily 7, but it could include part of 6.
Anything else, Steve?
No, that's it, thanks. Sorry.
No problem. So as I said, you can see that the population declined over the past 10 years. The next thing is just a statute that I referred to. And this was what the response we received from the state when we were trying to look at this initially. They sent us a copy of the statute, and if you see kind of, I want to say 2/3 down, it starts with a sentence that says, "A town or regional school district required to make a refund to the state pursuant to the subdivision may request forgiveness of such refund if the building is redirected for public use." So if that was going to happen, we'd have to make that request. I understand it has to go to the legislature. Further work has to be done to really flesh that out, what the requirements are there, what the dollar liability is, but that's a statute that dictates that particular decision. The next thing just has to do with the stuff we got from the state as to the liability, potential, what the dollar figures are associated with if we did have to pay something back. It's a little confusing to me, but it appears that the total project was, that for Bakerville was approximately $1.56 million at the time. Somehow the state took out some of that stuff and said those eligible costs were $1,144,936. They then said that there was a reimbursement rate, I think of 51.43%, but then they come up with a figure that says that the amount they kicked in was like 400 and, sorry, did we copy all the pages here? Well, 411,294 was the state reimbursement grant, which doesn't equate if you take a reimbursement rate of, they call something eligible, $1,144,936, and you take 51.43% of that, that is not $411,294. So, there's a discrepancy there that needs to be worked out, and hopefully we can get a response from the state and come up with some better figures with that. But anyway you cut it, there appears to be some sort of liability attached to that. The next set of documents just are the potential school configuration, because what would have to happen in this scenario is that if Bakerville is closed, New Hartford Elementary would become a pre-K through 1 school, and then second grade would move up to here. So, and as you can see how the rooms would potentially be laid out in both of the schools. Once again, nothing's reflected on all these kindergartens because we do not consider that, and this board hasn't even taken that up. And I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here because of recent information that I've become aware of by even talking about it, because we as a board haven't even discussed it. But the point is that it's not reflected here if that's the way you want to go, or the way we decide to go or need to go. And the last couple pages are just paper articles that talk about other districts that are going through the same thing. Just a couple things to know about the Region 12 plan. I understand they had a very difficult time getting this off the ground, and it really did take a third-party expert to come in to actually help facilitate that. But if you go through this article, you'll see the first selectman's quoted. There's members of the community who are involved. There's a whole litany of people involved in the decision to move forward the way they did. And that's what we're trying to help do here too, is get other people involved to help with this process. And I think that's the reason why this article's in here. One, to show that they sought expert help elsewhere, and two, there's a collaborative effort to try to get it off the ground. And then the one yesterday, just from the registered citizen, was just mostly focused on Winstead's problems. But, you know, Waterbury's quote in there, Stratford's quote in there, other communities are going through the same thing. So that's all we have in terms of a presentation. And at this point, we'd like to open up the floor to people to offer any opinions of what they think. Yes, Lisa.
I looked at a lot of this information beforehand too, so I was familiar with a lot of things that you were bringing up. I think there's a couple of key things that we need to get answers on before we can make a good decision, and one of them being what is a public use for that building. Your focus might be on your own budget, but our focus for the town is what is the ultimate responsibility to the taxpayer. So some of it will be shifted onto the town budget and therefore the taxpayer. So we will be looking at what can we do with the building. Will the state be able to define what is public use? Will it define public use as strictly only for the public? Will it allow any kind of a proration for like, as an example, a senior center or maybe a for-profit daycare? Do they allow something like that? What would a penalty be? I mean, if we're looking at maybe 3 years, because this year's gone, straight line that full $111,000, you're looking at a $120,000 penalty against your savings here of $383, which, quite frankly, I don't believe that curriculum specialist will go. I think that you guys will want that curriculum specialist in your repertoire of people here. This seems to be important to you, so I think your savings are a little nebulous and they need to be really researched further. And one of the last things was the Common Core standards. That's the big unknown. You know, if we're going to have an all-day kindergarten, if that's the route that we really should take as a town, we would have to, you know, somehow deal with those costs. But you can't close a school and then 2 years later do all-day kindergarten and add on to another school. That just won't work. So if we think that that's a real factor, then I think that's our answer. We can't do that.
I would just say, you know, thanks for the points, but, you know, one thing to consider here, you know, we've all been facing the declining budgets and the tough budgets and reductions. So the idea that we could actually even bring forward all-day kindergarten, where would that come from? You'd have to find, and quite frankly, we've tapped out all the, you know, many of the options available. So the idea that to start off an all-day kindergarten without finding the savings elsewhere, i.e. through a building consolidation, you know, the two won't work. You know, one something's got to give there.
But if you do a building consolidation, there's no room. There's no room unless you go back to Bakerville or you add on, because you're at capacity.
Is that correct? That was a question I had. It said to be 27 classrooms plus the special ones. Do we have classrooms to cover any future growth at all?
I'd ask, I'll let Dr. Rouse speak about that. I asked him to brief my question. We don't have a floor plan for that, but.
So to answer your question, not without changing some of those assumptions. So we may have to use some spaces that are designated for art or music or special education services now as classrooms in the event that there was a programmatic change that caused us to need more classrooms.
And could I elaborate further? Would that potentially have an adverse educational impact by eliminating certain spaces for purposes of covering perhaps another grade level?
Certainly, the most beneficial thing for art and music is to have a classroom space and not have a teacher moving around. That's why we give them a classroom, because it is beneficial. But oftentimes, when you get into space crunches, those are the things that you typically do. You put art and music on a card, or you put special education services into a shared setting, so there's multiple multiple teachers working out of a classroom space or a smaller classroom space. So, and I think frankly, they have been done in this district historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there have been some of those compromises that have been made.
So right now I'm gathering that the plan that you have utilizes all the existing classrooms with the current programs that you envision.
It does.
So once again, you have to balance the stuff, and it ends up, you can't have everything. The idea that we go to get an all-day kindergarten and also find the money to support the schools as we constantly get pressure to increase. First, I think it's unrealistic. I don't know where you find the money to go to that without finding costs elsewhere. And these are trade-offs. Is it ideal to have the kids packed in that situation? And educationally, it may be. Space-wise, not so great, but you have to balance. And there's pros and cons to both.
So Ray, if you don't mind, just for a minute, Jim, let me answer Ben's, let me give another example to Ben's question. Ben, if you look on the Antolini space, if you look on the far left-hand side, you'll see Oak Hill. You'll know from our discussions year after year that Oak Hill actually provides revenue for the town. An annual revenue that in my 7-year tenure has increased 3.5% every year, and consistently. So that revenue wouldn't, if we had to make a programmatic change in Antolini, that room would have to, obviously would be considered one of those that are potential to have to be outplaced.
But it's still in the
Also,
plan.
and besides the financial piece, and I know Kate's here, Oak Hill has offered this school and this school community some really exceptional programs for integration of special education children, children with special needs, and regular ed children as well. So those are but as Brian said, those are the compromises you have to make.
So quick question I have, so current student population, you're saying that you need a minimum of 27 rooms, right? That's.
That was one of our assumptions heading in.
Okay, so minimum of 27 rooms. If I look at Antolini configuration, the way you have it on this one, on these documents today, and New Hartford Elementary, showing about 32 rooms, excluding these resource rooms and, other rooms that are already reserved for other items. If you were to go to all-day kindergarten, and you had to go to all-day kindergarten, you're talking about adding maybe one more class, right, between New Hartford Elementary and Big, 2? Well, you've got an average of what, about 15 in a class right now, something like that, right? No? What's your population for kindergarten this year, 16?
17 to 19.
78 kids.
Okay, so you probably have, 2 classes.
How many?
Even adding 2 classes and going all-day kindergarten, even adding 2 classes to all-day kindergarten, you're not even consuming all of the available rooms in both New Hartford Elementary and Antolini. And to follow that up, if you're going by what Donald LaPlante is documenting relative to these birth certificates, between 7 and 8, you're minus 14. 8 and 9, your total is minus 16. 2010, you're plus 13. 2011, you're minus 13. So you still have a long way to go with a downward trend, and there may be a balance again at the end of the, by 2000, 5 years out, from now. So it's still showing, a downward trend significantly. And that doesn't take into consideration who might move in, who might move out, but this is going by the numbers from the town clerk. So with the available classrooms in both Antolini and New Hartford Elementary, a total of 32 rooms that also does not take into consideration rooms already used by the resources and special ed or tutors or whatever you're doing, the capacity is there. You're almost at capacity for the entire student population just in this building alone, if it was configured right.
Go ahead, Melissa.
I'm not, no opinion on whether or not this should be done, but when I hear capacity of fitting our entire population into the school building, that concerns me because that means the kids never leave their room. So the children never leave their classroom. So I would like for you to think about sitting in your office or one room in your house all day long and just to leave to go to the bathroom. And plus, you have to add 24 kids in your classroom, which in my child's situation is 24 in her class. Now, when she started school, I take it personal, but her situation, her grade is important. It's a current fifth grade class. They started at,
I know what you're saying, Melissa,
Well,
but you
no,
have the
wait.
luxury between
But
two
wait a minute.
schools. I'm not saying go with
when
one
they
school.
started
You have two
class in
schools still
kindergarten,
remaining.
there was 83 kids in the class. Now there's 94. So things can change a lot, and that's just kids moving into the school district.
I hear
And
you.
that happened just this
I
summer.
hear you,
a lot.
but you
So
have,
all I'm trying to say is, you have to be, I just am asking people to be realistic about consolidation and
Yeah.
fitting everybody in.
but I think the town needs to be presented with the facts. The capacity is there between the two remaining schools if you close Bakerville or you close New Hartford Elementary. It's your choice, whatever you want. But the bottom line is, there's 32 available classrooms without going into things even like O'Kell, for example, and your revenue's still there.
Jim, I agree, the capacity, that's why we wouldn't be here otherwise, that's, you know, I think.
So I think it's, I
that's part of
think the
bottom line.
discussion is, for the Board of Ed, which school do you want to keep open? New Hartford Elementary or Bakerville? And move forward from there.
Well, I think there's got to be some acknowledgement that there is a risk that down the road, the population trend changes. And there has to be some acknowledgement.
Absolutely, and there's a risk when they
in
wanted
5
to
years
build
from
this
now-
big school years ago, and look at where we are right now.
No,
Okay?
Reggie?
If the town makes an informed decision, I mean everybody in this room and the whole town, and we decide to close Bakerville, use that one school for example. Suppose we made a mistake and in 2 years, will the state allow you to reopen that and use that as a school, or do you have to go through some big certification process?
Remains to be determined. Also depends, I would say remains to be determined. I don't know the answer to that.
That should be a question that's,
But the question, I guess, is if what's it been doing for the past 2 years? Like what's the building, what's the purpose of the building been for the past 2 years? Obviously, if it's sold off to some third party, that's no longer an option.
my suspicion, the way things have been in this town for 50 years, is I'll sit idle for 2 years, and other than maintenance, it would still remain usable as a school, because no project's gonna get off the ground in 2 years. And I'm talking, it could be a year, it could be 10 years, that you find out you need the additional space. My concern was, will the state force you to go through some big certification process to be able to use that again as a school? I think that's a question that should be asked. Other than that, if it'll save money, I'm all in favor of you closing the school.
Elaine,
I would just like to ask Dan, this has been in some conversation for the last year or two. Has the Board of Selectmen considered what other public use could be made of this building? Have you talked about it? Have you had some ideas? Have you brainstormed ideas on how else it could be used?
We at this time, we talked about the initial request to have a meeting and really wondered about the data. The town does not have a future use in mind at this point. That said, I think that the Board of Selectmen is intrigued and interested in this conversation. In this economy, you know, we always come to you folks in February, March, and April and ask you to do the best you can for the community. And now here you're coming up with something that seems to be happening in a lot of different towns, and the population numbers don't lie. I was thinking the same thing that Reggie was thinking, and wondering what the sentiment, because until the last couple questions surfaced, it seemed to be that there was a permanence of when you close, is it permanent or not? The numbers that show on the classroom schematics that were provided show a fairly full building in both New Hartford and here, but something that appears to be due right in the short term, with the question that Mr. Tuxbury pointed out, is that the kids in K now, you know, if you look at the birth certificates, they're not going up, they're going down. So my thought process when we hit that point in the conversation was, I was wondering what the sentiment of the board members were to something that, the openness to discuss something that was not so permanent, you know, maybe an interim use or something, knowing that we had inventory of classrooms. The last thing I'd like to do is have a discussion, have the community get invested in a decision, and then find out 3 years from now that we needed 5 more classrooms because things took a swing on the upside, you know, and be asked to build classrooms when we disposed of an asset that has, 9 other classrooms at Bakerville.
But your numbers for the next 5 years, they're not saying it.
No, I agree. I'm just saying hypothetically a lot could change. I think you guys should be rewarded for having this conversation, because we always ask you to do more. And I think that we should discuss it further. I have questions about transportation. I wanted to make a point about New Hartford Elementary. It's my understanding that New Hartford Elementary can't be expanded further because of the floodplain issue that surrounds the building. And that should be a factor in furthering the discussion. If that was something that the goal was to keep individual grades in one building, to put, second grade there, or second grade here, first and second there, and that would be, in theory, maxed out by either future growth or mandate, that building could not be further expanded. My questions and concerns really go towards transportation. How does someone that lives down by the Keelty residence with a kindergartner get to New Hartford Elementary in a short amount of time? What's the impact on travel, transit, moving expenses? What's the budgeting allocation for if it were to become a town managed building for some portion of time? What does that do in our general government budget? But I hear a lot of positives about what can be done with curriculum in terms of getting these teams together, that I think that you start off with a lot of positive pros on your side. It does look tight in certain areas, in terms of the buildings are built, but then you have, I think that the community would be upset if we didn't further the discussion based on your general estimate for savings that you provided at this point. How can you say, well, geez, we think we might save $300,000 a year, and say, oh, we don't want to look into that. $300,000 a year is an awful lot of money in my book, and I think that it's something that should be, considered. In my mind, can you temporarily shutter a school, perhaps reallocate for a few years, and know that you have that asset in good condition, ready to be used? Is something to consider. I'm interested to know what the board thinks in terms of where their part lies, in terms of this is, I don't know that there's been a motion, like you say, or the board hasn't come up with a recommendation for the town to consider.
Well, I think for you, honestly, from my perspective, you presented an ideal situation. That if that was the case, where the town could use it for another purpose for a period of years, and then the fact that we could go back and revisit the conversation, even get it in writing, that the fact that, give 2 or 3 years notice and start seeing population trends increase and say, we're gonna have to do something about this, and we're getting to that point, classes are, when we have to add sections, we're running out of room, it's not gonna happen immediately. It's not like we're gonna I don't feel it's gonna happen immediately. We're not gonna wake up in the morning and find out we need, 5 sections everywhere. It would be a slow, methodical increase that I think we'd be able to see, but if that was, from my perspective, that would be ideal.
I think, but Reggie's point is well taken. You don't want to make a move without knowing the answer to the question that, an existing going concern of the school gets closed. Are there any things that we don't know about?
These are all things that need to get fleshed out, and we'd love some additional assistance with that. When we started looking at this past spring, we'll say, our Board of Education was tapped out in terms of other obligations. We had budget stuff, we had negotiations still going on. Everyone, and policy, everyone was doing a lot of things. So, we get a point where some of these questions need to get answered. We may need legal assistance, the town attorney or our attorney. Obviously, we've not budgeted any money to seek any of these answers from any of other assistance. But, getting some kind of committee together for, as I said, representatives from the Board of Finance and Selectmen get together, join our long-term planning committee, try to hash some of these issues out, get some answers. I think it would be great.
The other thing is perhaps challenging that designation of 2016, because we all know that Bakerville was up and running in 2003, 2004, that building was being fully utilized. So perhaps on the state's end, in their evaluation of their paperwork, this is more an administrative designation, because we know that there were children in all portions of that school. Steve and I were, there every day. The construction was finished. And there were kids in those classrooms in 2003.
I think that is one thing we did look at, right? Look at the minutes to verify that. Once again, just because the state has told us something doesn't, just when we look, I'll give you an example of the magnet schools. you know, state told us we're responsible to pay for that, and we challenged it. And so far, we're going to be successful in that with regard to preschool. So I think in that sense, just because the state is telling us and we think otherwise, and we have some backing from you know, our town attorney, or someone who's telling us something different, these things certainly should be challenged. Try to put us in the best possible position.
Well, I think the more people you can get involved and to help garner community support and let the numbers be known, let the evaluation take place, that you've had a thoughtful discussion on this, that Dr. O'Reilly has worked with the administrators to try to understand the curricular benefits and tighten up some of the numbers on savings. You know, obviously, to me, if it's going to cost more buses, you know, to move first graders across town, or whether there's a link bus that would go from here or not, I don't know how, I don't know the Institute of Busing. I have some familiarity just with my own children, but, you know, if there's a, you know, an offset in having to add transportation costs to move K-1 students all the way, you know, unfortunately, New Hartford Elementary is not more centrally located, but, you know, how that would work, you know, to tighten up the numbers on what the estimates are so that people can make that informed decision and get people involved and let them participate in the decision-making process. But at this point, I think you have a lot of information there that shows that, you know, it's worth looking into.
I will say that I would assume at the moment that we would have to add some transportation to make this work, because we just cut a bus. The other thing too, and this once again gets us all in kindergarten, which we have not discussed about even, but if we went to that route, you end up eliminating the midday run. So, you know, that could also, we wouldn't have that anymore. We have buses that go in the middle of the day to allow for the half-day kindergarten right now, that would be eliminated, so maybe it's more of a balancing if that ended up happening. I don't know, but for the moment, I'd say you have to assume that there would have to be some additional transportation. But once again, we're not going to know that definitely. We can do an analysis of this year's kids, but next year's a whole other year, and there'll be different kids in different locations. So to say with any degree of certainty, even though we have the hour, it's not ideal. It's not ideal to have kids our ages on the bus for an hour. Reggie?
Thank you, Reg. My question, I should probably know the answer to it, but what percentage of your $345,000 savings, what percentage of the general education budget in New Hartford is that? What is it, in round numbers, the general education budget in town now is what, 6 million?
About
7.8 million?
So it's less than 5%, 350,000? 4%. My other question is, when you look at the enrollment in 2000, beginning in 2002, and up until 2009, it seems like there's between 30 and 40 more kids at the Bakerville school in those years that didn't get on the chart. So I'm wondering, is that because more of the population lives in Bakerville, and more of the housing that houses the children is in Bakerville? And is New Hartford Elementary, you know, kind of on a geographical edge of New Hartford?
Well, one of the changes there, Jack, is that at that time, you'll see a reduction from 5 sections to 4. So there were 3 sections being held at Bakerville and 2 at New Hartford Elementary, and then they got split from 2 to 2. So even though I do think that most of our kids do live in this area of town overall, what you're seeing, the reflection there is more the fact that we've made the change, we reduced sections and shifted a series of kids over to New Hartford Elementary.
So
I think, Jack, also, you can't draw too many conclusions from that, because Bakerville is a bigger school. So obviously,
that was my next question.
we're gonna take people from West Hill more and move them over into Bakerville when we need them.
Right.
You know, so you're just gonna expand the.
No, I'm just thinking
area.
in twofold. One is would there potentially be more potential use for the New Hartford Elementary School for, you know, other uses for the town, or other, you know, leasing opportunities for private daycare, or whatever they might be, or because of its proximity to Route 44 in Canton and the Farmington Valley versus the Bakerville School. And the second piece of this is if everybody that's using the school system, or the majority of the people that are using the school system, live closest to the Bakerville School, whether it's the West Hill, that might be a big saving transportation cost-wise. And if the Bakerville School, if I heard in the beginning, Mr. Chairman, did you say the Bakerville School is bigger than the New Hartford Elementary School?
It is bigger, correct. But it's also just a trade-off there.
No.
It's just, we feel it's a lesser facility, but I fully understand where you're coming from, and that's something we can certainly look at.
I think our decision to focus on Bakerville was, a couple of reasons, was that New Hartford had more recently had the addition work done to it, and it is a brick school rather than a wood frame school. And it also has a much larger gymnasium. So we weren't tied to one or the other. Those are the reasons why we went to research the way we did.
Too close to New Hartford Elementary.
No, the reason we went with Bakerville was because of those reasons. Obviously, if you were to close New Hartford, there could be potential substantially more cost.
Very last question, Steve. If the Bakerville school is closed currently, and there's 110 students at the Bakerville school, where do those 110 students go to school? Do they go to this school, or do they go to New Hartford Elementary School?
Second graders come here, and then the kindergarten and first graders go to New Hartford Elementary, under the plan that we've
Would
developed
we
so far.
have 50 of the 110 students, 55 of them? would go
Third
to-
here, 2/3 over there approximately. If you, the class sizes are different, grades are different sizes, but
Yeah.
approximately a third of them would come up here, 2/3 would go over there.
Thank you.
Reggie?
As Chairman Brian, what do you want to see as the next step, and what do you need from the other boards?
Well, I'm pleased by the discussion. Pleased everyone's here to talk about it. It seems to be a movement afoot to take this further. It might be a good idea to get a subcommittee going to try to work on some of these issues. We weren't really sure what direction, where people would go. If someone said, forget about it, don't do anything, then we can stop. We're done. We've done our work. But it seems to me that there's a movement afoot to take this a further step. And it might be a good idea for us to, as I said, we have a long-term subcommittee who's been dealing with these issues in our board. Happy to take over a couple additional members from the other boards to kind of further get some answers to some of these questions. Maybe report back to some kind of joint meeting, and eventually get to a public hearing in town and get some feedback from the other people who live here.
Could I add
final
one
question.
thing you did mention, Brian, earlier, is a decision whether or not we bring in a third party to perhaps assist us in our deliberations, whether it's somebody who has some experience looking at this, or it might even require maybe counsel over some of the technicalities of dealing with, as you mentioned, moving the state with respect to its interpretation of the statute. We do not in our budget this year have monies to cover that, so I guess I would ask if there is possibly some small amount of funds we could use to kind of help. So, if that's something deemed necessary, that we might need some help with that.
I think we could take it up with the subcommittee and then determine
Yeah.
whether that is truly necessary.
Get an estimate.
People want to, we're feeling that we had to go that route, and we couldn't get the answer otherwise. It's not easy getting answers from the state, and even if they give you one, it's not necessarily the correct one, so.
What do you get from Education Connection? What do you get out of Education Connection?
What do we get out of it?
Yeah, well, how do you use them? Is there a fee or something, or?
Sometimes there are for
Because what's his name, Costa, he's the one that gave you the presentation, which I saw, and he's also the one that's consulting for Norfolk and Colebrook right now on their consolidation or co-op or regionalization, if you would. They're going through there, so I was wondering what kind of involvement we might be able to get from him.
We haven't actually contracted him for anything, because regional was the one who brought him to that. I assume they paid him, I don't know that definitely.
Well, no, this is different. This is Colebrook and Norfolk Elementary.
No, yeah, no, I know.
Not Region 7.
Right, I'm just saying that the presentation he gave at regional, I assume was paid by the regional's budget, that wasn't us. So there is probably a fee associated. If you look at the article about Region 12, at least it's mentioned there that 3 towns each gave $5,000 I assume to pay Education Connections for this.
All right, so if you guys put a stake in the ground, my understanding is you're trying to target by the end of this school year, this current school year, June of 2013, going into September of 2013, that you want to be in 2 schools consolidated. So with that stake in the ground, scheduling backwards, do you have all those milestones documented that you want to try and achieve yet, and what it's going to take to get there?
No.
Because I think that's going to be the important thing, because that might tell everybody whether next year is doable or not.
Well, that's why we need everyone else's help on this. That's why we're here.
And a lot of
In order to get this off the ground, we need other people's support. And it seems to me that that's kind of the direction we're going. My recommendation is we get a subcommittee going and try to figure out what we need to get answered. If at some committee meeting, make a determination whether it really is necessary to get someone else involved. And then we can certainly look into Education Connections or another source, CAVE, or one of these other organizations and see, what's their basic consulting fee. But I don't think it's gonna be a heck of a lot of money overall, but it is something, once again, that we haven't put in our budget. We didn't put it in there, so, probably have to come from another source.
I have one last thing to add, and I would volunteer for the subcommittee, by the way.
Thank you.
I did go on the Kansas State Department of Education website today, and I looked at a lot of the Common Core state standards, and this I printed out, this is just for kindergarten.
Right.
Just kindergarten. And I mean, I flipped through it, and I'm finding all kinds of things that I don't think my kindergartner did, and I don't see how they can expect kindergartners to do that in a half a day, so.
That's why a lot of the school districts are going into full day. Canton had implemented 2 years ago next door. Canton implemented a program that was with CREC. And CREC paid for a teacher to come in and teach a second half of a kindergarten class to have a full day. The next year, the position became a full-time. So they had 2 full-day kindergartens running. Now they're up to 3 full-day, and 1 teacher teaches 2 half-days. So, and they're running into a problem next door with capacity. And that's the trend, they're next door. So
Well, obviously,
it is
if you look at
big.
it, sorry to interrupt, but if you look at an all-day kindergarten scenario, that's gonna eat into these potential savings. I mean, that's just the reality situation. And that's where it comes up, like, well, if you're gonna look at an all-day kindergarten, well, where are you coming up with the money to pay for it anyway? So, savings could do that, but that's gonna reduce that number
Yeah,
by a lot.
I agree, you're right, but even with the current inventory of what you have between 2 schools, you have a significant surplus of inventory for the student population today, and with all day kindergarten, plus with the downward trend for the next 5 to 6 years based on the numbers from the town clerk, with 2 schools.
Kate?
I think this was a good first step, and I think that asking you to, clearly define A, B, and C is premature at this time. I think it's a huge undertaking that you've taken upon yourselves, and you do need the help of other people. And when I listen to the speakers in this room, there's a lot of expertise here and a lot of help, and we're all willing to do this. But I think that we have to just remember this is step 1, and I think it's a great idea. I do have to tell you that one of my personal concerns is I'm looking at many of people in this town who are my age and moving out, and there are a lot of houses for sale here, and my fear is what happens if those are filled with people who aren't on that birth certificate list because they've been born somewhere else. And I think we have to think about that too. And the economy is bad now, but when it gets good, New Hartford is a place where people are going to want to come. It's not like, and I don't mean to disparage Waterbury, but when they close schools, I don't know if there's the kind of attraction that New Hartford has. So I just think these are things that we have to keep in mind, and this is a great first start, so thank you.
I also want to make the point that nobody had raised, and that there is a human element here. There are people behind these potential positions that would be eliminated. There is investment that we have made as a town in their training, and so when you let people go and they're trained people, if you bring them back again, or you may not be able to bring them back again, you bring new people back again and you have to retrain them. So there is a human element here. And the second thing is that when you start talking about eliminating jobs, it creates a panic. And this Board of Education has heard me say many times, our focus needs to be on kids and learning. And sometimes when you have some of these discussions, it becomes a bit scary to the employees. So I would just caution you that there is that human element. So
This economy has been for these 12 years. I've been through it in my business.
I just want to say there is a human element.
It's the reality of the situation.
You said the purpose of this meeting was to gauge a general interest in looking at it further. I haven't heard any objections to that. It sounds like people think that that's the right thing to do, is to look further. To Philip's point, there's a lot of people that can envision their name on the list there, but there's a lot of other people, a lot more other people that, have their favorite school, and everybody's got their own agendas. The sooner that a set of, I don't know what you would call them, guiding principles, considerations that are bedrock of the planning process, the sooner you can come up with something like that, the better, so that people can bounce their concerns against that. For example, what about if there's, an increase in population? I personally like the idea of keeping the other school as an option for a few years, just in case, because you're not gonna know. I don't think you can study your way through that and have a solid answer. But, some of the things that you want to preserve, like the income generating rental that you have here, the art classrooms, what have you. If you're starting consolidation and art in a card and all these things right out of the chute, I think you're going to lose some interest. But the better we can flesh out, here's what we want to accomplish by doing it. Financial, educational, quality of life, just everything that people might have concerns about. They can at least bounce it against that. They may not get what they want, but at least they, when they're talking to their friends about it, they might have a hard time selling it as something other than a personal interest, because you're going to get a lot of opinions on it, that's for sure. So.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to be unhappy. And that's just the nature of it. You're not going to make everyone happy in these situations, and they're tough decisions.
But I think the sooner you have something that you can stand on, that you can't immediately shoot holes. What do you mean you don't have any planning for the future? You got to stop the basic questions that come up before you've ever had a chance to even do that, quite honestly.
Right.
The sooner you can get some of those things together and out, the sooner people will understand that it's being looked at objectively and no decisions are being made. And these are the boards, what have you, that are involved, and lots of listening, lots of input.
So that's why we're here to start that.
So Brian, I'm very sensitive to what, Philip is saying regarding, the lives, personnel involved and everything, but I would hate to see that the town is going under the impression that this is a jobs program as well. We're not about to keep a school open just to keep jobs, and I don't think that should be the tone.
It's not.
Nor is it. That's clearly not my point, John. It is that we have to keep in
Because I
mind
heard
that
that
there are
for Region
people.
7 at the last budget cycle, and I don't think we should be doing that here.
I'm more, thinking about the human element too, is Ben just pointed out, of people losing their school.
Yeah.
There's a big human element associated with that.
I agree.
We in the land, who live in the land of steady habits, are not used to such change, and it's gonna be hard to work around that.
And one other point that I meant to mention. As soon as you start talking about spending money on this school building, assuming this is one that stays, it's going to immediately get linked to that, whether it's doors and windows or, something you have to do right now anyway or not. It seems to me that the sooner you can come up with what do you need for the school regardless of what you do with it. I think we pretty well got it, to be honest with you. But so that people can bounce any future expenditures that show up. Here's what we're doing with or without this consolidation. Here's what we're doing because of the consolidation. So that people don't automatically assume that, you're spending $1 million on a roof and windows and,
I think what the whole board has been looking at is we piecemeal putting together all the schools. Now it's become a big project. Now what's left needs to be put all together. And part of that project would entail, okay, if we're going to add the second graders to this building, there are some other concerns that are going to pop up. And I think we as a board have already discussed, and we've decided that what we need to do is put everything together now. We've done the little things and the piecemeal here and here. Now we're looking at the big project, and that's why we wanted to know where people stood on this issue, because that gives us an idea of where we can now put things together.
I think if people can understand, here's what you got to do regardless, and here's what you got to do or should do to consolidate.
Personally, I think they're separate issues, because the building aspect, I don't think is contingent on a consolidation plan or not. Keeping them separate is from my perspective.
I'm just reading things like parking lot, and I suspect there's going to be some money spent.
There may be something along those lines. Obviously, there's, moving a foot for additional recreation in the back, which may call for more parking too. Dan and I, we've spoken about these issues already, so, these are all sort of separate things. and this is, I guess, the direction we'd like to ask is, we are looking for a building committee to kind of address these needs that have been talked about in prior budget cycles. I don't know if we need a formal letter or something to bring that up, or we just kind of bring it to the selectmen now and say, can you consider that for, future needs here, the ones we've been talking about, the big capital issues. Because we would like to get that off the ground also. And also, I do think they're not tied together. That people need to know that there's still needs here that need to get addressed, whether we consolidate or not. And so, if we could, I'd like to make that formal request too, to try to get that off the ground.
Perhaps a motion before requesting further 3 minutes, and maybe it's followed up by a letter from the superintendent, not to be extensive.
Okay.
One or two. I think that we're all kind of in this nowhere, undecided place because nobody ever anticipated that this economy would take us to the place that we're at. And I think that Kate makes a very solid point, is that we live in a wonderful community and we have great schools. We have very high-performing schools that we all care deeply about. But who would have foreseen the drop in enrollment? I mean, it's really, compared to the 2001 estimates that showed beyond that we should have been 100 or 150 above where we were in 2002. It's really a dramatic change. I think that it will recover eventually, and I think that New Hartford will continue to be seen. But obviously, it's all into the economy and jobs and people really fighting for their daily existence of how they take care of their families. But I think that this is a rewarding conversation because it shows that we care about our taxpayers, we care about our kids. We're trying to research all ends to see if we can do things better and at a better cost to our taxpayers. So I think you can't ignore that. And I think that with the codification of some better data and some answers to some of the critical, more expensive components, I think we'll all find ourselves in a place where we can make a better decision, a more informed decision. But I think a lot of it still needs to be worked on and molded at this point, and I think that it's good that we follow up. So,
One of the other points I think that's...
Maria's had her hand up for a little while.
Just one point, when you put your building committee together from the different boards, would you mind also bringing in the cost of a consultant like Jonathan Costa, so that we can consider that as, is it something that we would like to do? Because the 5,000 may be really a little money compared to what he could bring to us from the work that he's been doing with other districts. I would really like to see that.
I can see, yes, I think
Thank you.
that makes sense.
Thank
But
you.
the point I'm trying to get is like, we have to give them a scope. What is the job task in front of you? So I think, personally, I think it would be worthwhile to set up a subcommittee at this point of people in the various boards, at least have a preliminary meeting again to try to put down on a piece of paper, and Katie's taking notes over here, some of these concerns everyone has, so that we can kind of direct who's doing what, and then certainly we can follow up with someone like Jonathan Costa and try to get some figures from him. But I can imagine him coming back and saying, well, what exactly do you want me to do? So we need to sort of narrow that down too, so that we can put it out to bid, or at least give a job spec as to what the expectations are.
You don't think that he could help us reach a good scope in itself? I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
He could
I
be
don't
just
disagree
part
at
of
all.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jim?
An interesting point also is what we're seeing with the elementary schools in Colebrook and Norfolk. Not that it has anything to do with this local board, but for the general population in New Hartford, it has a significant impact on the town. We just experienced, an 7.5% increase from to New Hartford for Region 7. But if you look at the decreases that we're talking about in those two towns at the elementary level, between 15 to 35% over the next few years, take that into consideration with our stable population for the next few years, going up through 6th grade and then out to Region 7, the balance is going to be a significant hit to us again in another 2 years of anywhere from 7 to 10% just to the town, not necessarily, to the budget for New Hartford elementary schools, but to the town from Region 7. So you think about the impact that this is going to have on the taxpayers in town again, it's going to be significant because as they drop and we're stable for a few years, we still realize that significant increase because we are the greater part of that population. We have more students, but less power relative to a road up there, and it's gonna hurt us.
One of the duties of my job was 2 years ago, I was on the regionalization committee, and we looked into all of the things that are possible. One of the things handed out at that time was a discussion that at any time, New Hartford could look into removing our kids from Region 7 and putting them in our own high school here in town, and we would be reimbursed the amount of money we've invested in Region 7, and would it, but that was a discussion that was shown as part of our discussions. There are always those possibilities in the future, if we get to that point where that becomes such a onerous that the town could look at. But those are things that are out there that are possible to look into. We're just, right now, and Holbrook and Norfolk's a whole different kettle of fish. I've dealt with them, and I've seen what's happening over there. They do have a really small community. They also, Norfolk also has a preschool program guaranteed to every kid in town. And their cost per student 2 years ago was $17,000 per kid. Barkhamsted has one building, and their cost per kid was $10,000 and change. We couldn't justify regionalizing to get to that 10,000 level. We were looking at least New Hartford and Barkhamsted looking at a tax increase, and that wasn't what we were looking at it for. So what we're trying to do is looking at here and what we see works, and if we can do it and we have the capacity, reducing to 2 buildings and seeing how it works.
Okay, I think if we can, I know it's kind of, we have still a meeting to run too, so I'd like to kind of wrap this up with this. I would ask perhaps that, I think the Board of Finance meets next week, is that correct? And then I don't know when the next Board of Selectmen, maybe you can talk amongst yourselves who you'd like to give to us for the purposes of having a subcommittee. And then from there, if you can do that, we can schedule another meeting, maybe after that, the following, and try to get together and flush some of these issues out. I think that would be a good next step to take away from here. If you do that, would be great.
Sounds good.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming. It's an important meeting, and I'm glad you're all here. And if you'd like to stick around for the rest of our meeting, by all means.
Thank you all.
Thanks for your plug.